Brees could be moving toward the media comeback he's wanted for years. Plus, we have a natural experiment going on how much winning can improve team attendance. A women's lacrosse league is starting, and later we're going deep on some NBA topics. It's Thursday, November 14th. I'm your host, Owen Poindexter, and this is Front Office Sports Today. In today's episode, we're discussing the media future of Drew Brees with our tuned-in columnist Mike McCarthy after Brees appeared on ESPN's Monday Night Countdown. We'll hear from him on what ESPN is saying about the relationship with the legendary QB. Later, we're chatting with ESPN's Bobby Marks on the undefeated Cavs, the in-season tournament, and how load management rules are changing how NBA teams operate. We also have stories from soccer, college football, the NFL, and Unrivaled. Here are your top headlines. Netflix has sold out all 5 of its ad packages for its 2 NFL Christmas games later this year. The 2 games are expected to be a huge boon for the streaming giant as the NFL is vying to take over Christmas Day from the NBA. Verizon and FanDuel each bought presenting sponsorships while BMW paid to sponsor the halftime shows for each game. According to Adweek's Bill Bradley, each of the 5 packages sold for at least $5 million. The deal to sell the Oakland Coliseum hit a snag on Tuesday after the Alameda County Board of Supervisors delayed the sale to the African American Sports and Entertainment Group. The Board of Supervisors said they want more time to consider the A's sale of their 50% share to the AASEG. David Haubert, a supervisor, said, "It's a very complicated deal. In fact, we have a property owned by 2 separate owners, and one is already in transaction." To make matters worse, AASEG missed a $10 million payment after financial partner Loop Capital withheld the funds for the payment due to uncertainty. To college sports, a federal judge denied Vanderbilt quarterback Diego Pavia's temporary restraining order that would have granted him another year of NCAA eligibility on Tuesday. Pavia sued the NCAA in federal court last Friday, arguing that his 2 seasons at JUCO shouldn't count due to his inability to profit off NIL. However, the judge did not close the case entirely. He requested a preliminary injunction on the case, giving the NCAA a chance to defend its position. Over to Europe, 4,000 police officers and 1,600 stadium staff will be deployed for today's Nations League game between Israel and France. Paris Police Chief Laurent Nunez said, "There's a context, tensions that make that match a high-risk event for us, and that they won't tolerate any violence." The security detail comes after Israeli fans were assaulted at last week's game between Maccabi Tel Aviv and Ajax in Amsterdam. In sports media, Drew Brees made a guest appearance on ESPN's Monday Night Countdown earlier this week, marking the first time he's stepping into an analyst role since his time with NBC came to an end over 2 years ago. Could this appearance mark the start of a media comeback for Brees? Tuned-in columnist Mike McCarthy joins the show to talk about what's next for the former Saints quarterback right after this. I'm joined now by Front Office Sports tuned-in columnist Mike McCarthy. Welcome, Mike.
Great to be here, Owen.
Always great to have you. So, Drew Brees appeared on Monday Night Countdown as an analyst with ESPN. Is this the beginning of a comeback for Brees, who clearly still wants to be a TV analyst?
It could be. Brees told you himself that he thinks he could be the best at it, and he wants another shot. Here's the thing, Owen. It's very tough for people who failed on sports TV to make a comeback. And I'll just point you to Jason Witten, the former Monday Night Football analyst and Cowboys tight end, who's been in the witness protection program TV-wise ever since. However, Brees has a history of making his doubters look foolish. What I was hearing from ESPN is this was a one-shot thing. It wasn't an audition. He's not been hired, but you never know. And I watched him on Monday night. He looked good with Van Pelt and company. He was opinionated about Matthew Stafford. He looked really strong. And don't forget, this is a guy who NBC once thought of as the successor to Chris Collinsworth. So the talent is there. It's can you bring it out of him?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think there's a couple points in there. And one, I mean, it's a job where you're expected to deliver, from day one and be really good. I mean, we saw with Brady, everyone was after a single game. It was like, I don't know if he's good at this job. You can give him a minute. But it's also one, there's a reason for that. It's incredibly selective. There are, put them all together, something like 10 analyst spots, more if you add in all the studio gigs, available out there for NFL, TV broadcasters. So not a whole lot of space there. But do you think, I mean, of course, ESPN is saying this is a one-time thing, but that just means they're not publicly committing to this just yet. Do you think we're going to see a round 2 here?
I do. I think somebody's going to give him another shot. I don't know if it's going to be ESPN because it sounded like when you interviewed him, Owen, that he wasn't really interested in the studio. He's more interested in broadcasting games. So I think his best move, rather than be to go to ESPN or an NBC, where they only have one national game per week, would be to go to a Fox or a CBS where they have three or four crews, and he can get on the number two or number three crew and learn his trade, learn the ins and outs of being a broadcaster. Because as you hinted at, this is an unforgiving business. You have one bad game on a national stage, you're out. I mean, he had one playoff game where he called the Bengals game, and he was terrible, and everybody was like, "That's it. Drew Brees is, he sucks. He can't do this job." One game, so it's an unforgiving business, and you got to be prepared to give it everything you got, especially during the playoffs.
Yeah, but even on the Fox's third or fourth team, or maybe another network, is there that space for him to kind of box his way in and give it a try? I mean, it's still one of the most selective jobs in media.
I think there is, and I will say that for this, he's Drew Brees. He's a future Hall of Famer. He's thrown the second most touchdown passes than anybody in NFL history, besides a guy named Tom Brady. So he's not just another, Dan Orlovsky ex backup quarterback who's out there trying to be a broadcaster. He's a huge name, and if he can bring that charm and that insight over being a Hall of Fame quarterback, to the game, then I think he's got a shot. But you're really spot on accurate about these jobs. There's so few of them, and the people who were in them last 15, 20 years, to me, they've been compared to Supreme Court appointments, right? If you're the number one analyst for a network, it's like getting picked for the Supreme Court. You're there for 20 years.
Right. I mean, I was trying to think of, who he could replace. And it's like, well, yeah, Collinsworth's essentially got tenure. Romo's got tenure. Obviously, they don't actually have tenure, but like it's going to take something momentous for them to actually leave, either them just deciding their career's over or, with some horrible gaffe or whatever. But it takes a lot for these guys to go. If he is dead set on being a broadcaster, so you think being in the studio, maybe if he did that, he'd just get siloed there and wouldn't find a way into the booth?
I don't know if you get siloed. I mean, a lot of the best game analysts, Phil Simms, Chris Collinsworth, have also done studios. So if I'm Drew Brees and I'm serious about a TV career, and somebody says, "Well, Drew, we don't have a room for you on the game team, but we'd love to have you in the pregame and the postgame," I'd say yes, because he could, get his reps in, make a good impression in the studio, and then move to a game broadcast. So I don't think there's the choice of being silent. I just go by what he says. I mean, his passion is in calling a game, live. He wants to do what Troy Aikman does. He wants to do what Romo does. He wants to do what Collinsworth does, which is to be there in the scene and 80,000 people screaming and ideally call a Super Bowl. That's his dream. So, that's his dream, not to be on, Monday Night Countdown and, have 90 seconds of airtime while you're competing with Marcus Spears and Ryan Clark and all these other guys to make your points.
Yeah. I mean, those studio shows, I'm kind of amazed every time that they're not constantly talking over each other. I mean, sometimes they do, but like, it's,
well, they
very
do
well
actually.
Yeah. While we've got you, I wanted to hop over to the NBA and NHL and really to Diamond Sports Group, which is going to start offering $7 per game broadcast if you don't have their full streaming package. Does this seem like a desperation move, or they're just like finding that gap in the market where people, they don't want every game, but they'll pay up here and there?
Oh, clearly a desperation move. I mean, they're throwing anything against the wall and seeing it sticks. But sometimes when a desperation move can produce a great idea. When you're back against the wall, you get creative. And what we're seeing here is the gradual destruction of the cable bundle, where people told us and showed us what we could watch in favor of the fan choosing what to watch. You remember back in the, it wasn't even that long ago, March Madness, you only had one broadcast feed. They would ping pong between the games. So fans and viewers are getting more and more control over what they watch. And, I've heard this idea, thrown about for years. Why can't I just watch the one game I want to watch? Why do I have to watch the whole season? I think it's a fantastic idea. Give it a shot.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Mike McCarthy, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Owen.
How much does winning matter when it comes to getting fans to show up and tune in? The Winnipeg Jets are currently running a fascinating experiment on that question. The Jets made NHL history on Tuesday, becoming the first team ever to win 15 of their first 16 games after they beat the Rangers 6-3 at the Garden. This same team also had one of the worst attendances in the NHL last year. So what's happening now that they've put together a historically good start? Things are better, but better is a relative term. Compared to this point last year, the Jets' average home attendance is up by just under 1,900 people to 13,764. That's the biggest increase of any team in the NHL. That still puts them second lowest in the NHL, just ahead of the Sharks, who are still trying to swim their way out of the bottom of the standings. The wins they are putting up now will, I expect, lead to more ticket sales as the season goes on and fan excitement builds. One way or another, we're going to learn a lot about this market's viability. Over to women's sports, we have another new women's sports league, but this one comes with some caveats. The Premier Lacrosse League is launching the Women's Lacrosse League. However, when Front Office Sports reached out for details, we learned that the only thing officially on the calendar so far is a 2-week tournament with 4 teams. To be fair, you have to start somewhere, and lacrosse is still fighting for space in the American sports fans' consciousness. But new leagues take years-long investments, and it's unclear at the moment what kind of investment we're looking at here. The PLL, for instance, is an 8-team league that plays a 10-game season. PLL president Paul Rabel told us that he wants to expand the WLL, but not necessarily in the manner of most other team sports. He said the WLL could have, quote, multiple championship series, and you have major tournaments like you do in golf and tennis. I applaud the PLL for what it's doing here, but it's a little premature to call it a league until we have more than 4 teams playing for 2 weeks. The in-season tournament is beginning while the NBA standings are not what we thought they would be. The Mavs and Knicks are only okay, the Sixers are bad, and the Cavaliers have been the best team in the NBA. I spoke with ESPN's Bobby Marks on how much of this is real, if the in-season tournament is going to stay meaningful for players and fans, and how much load management rules are changing how teams operate. Here's our conversation. Joined now by front office insider at ESPN, Bobby Marks. Welcome, Bobby.
How are you? Great to be here.
Yeah, great to have you back on as always. Let's start with the Cavs, who, at the start of the season, if we were listing teams who are definitely better than the Cavs, at least a little, I think we would have said the Celtics, Thunder, maybe you could throw in the Knicks, Wolves, maybe even the Mavericks or the Pacers. Right now, as of the time of recording, they are undefeated. They're playing the Sixers tonight, who I think are 2-8. So we'll see how that goes. Anyway, how many teams would you say right now are better than the Cavaliers?
I mean, I think you still have to put Boston up there just because of what they did last year. And I think even though they had a hiccup in the first in-season tournament game against Atlanta, I'm not ready to dethrone the Celtics here. But after that, I think Cleveland's right there with them. I find it funny. We go through these periods where and certainly in the media, we get fascinated whenever a team changes, right? Whenever there's a big trade or there's a big free agent signing and who won the summer. And, the Knicks get Karl-Anthony Towns and Paul George. And then here comes Cleveland, who didn't make any changes to their roster at all, except coaching change. They hired Kenny Atkinson, who was in Golden State, for J.B. Bickerstaff, who's doing a terrific job in Detroit in itself. And here they are, as far as as we're recording, the lone undefeated team, and I think it's one of the great stories out there that sometimes continuity matters, right? Like sometimes what you see, from either the playoffs, them losing to the Celtics in the second round, like maybe it isn't worth breaking up and bringing in all these different pieces here, and they've been. Right now the best team in the NBA. And they're doing it like a lot of different ways. It's like defense, right? They're one of the top teams in defense. And then you look at their bench and, there's guys like Ty Jerome, who didn't play last year, that played great the other night against Chicago. And I said this on a sports channel the other morning, the biggest thing, and I think it's for everyone to keep an eye on, is, how they're resting the starters, right? Like Donovan Mitchell feels every year, whether it been in Utah or Cleveland, like we get to like April and it's like he's got one leg, right? He's like limping to the finish line. He's getting an injection in his knee and stuff like that. And you look at Mitchell's minutes, he has, he's below it's the career low so far. But they are one of the great stories. And I think how the East is, like right now, basically they just need to go 500 the rest of the way. And I think they could finish at least in a 2 or a 3 seed.
Yeah, I mean they're one of like two or three teams above 500 right now in the East. Yeah, and on that, resting Mitchell and just like them having a pretty deep rotation, do you think the new rules around star load
Yeah.
management are those changing how teams divvy up their minutes and maybe even how they're constructing their rosters? Do they want to be deeper now?
I think it has to be. I think depth is a priority here. New York's going to be the I guess the guinea pig this season. They're going to really test the depth part of it. I haven't really looked at their schedule for back to backs, but you watch New York, where they're forced to play their starters 35 plus minutes based on some injuries to their depth, some of the the apron rules where they can't add a 15th player here. But I think that's the way to get around the load management here, is where you have a schedule of when guys are playing throughout the game. And it's funny, you're watching Cleveland the other night and Chicago's coming back and Donovan Mitchell's on the bench and there's 6 minutes left. And they're like, is he going to put him back in the game? And it's like, as soon as it hit 5:30, Mitchell's back in. So you are managing the minutes. You're still playing. You're still winning, but you're not grinding these guys into the ground playing 38 minutes plus, and then the recovery rate takes them 72 hours to recover here.
Yeah. When I see that Knicks team, I'm like, that's a really good starting five. But yeah, 6 through 12, I'm not sure.
Well, that's the beauty. Like everyone, like I got a lot of heat from Celtics fans over and when the Towns trade happened, because I said it on NBA Today, and I'm like, this is the best starting five in the NBA, and everyone Celtics fans, and I said, but that doesn't mean that they're the best team, right? Like just because you have the best starting five doesn't mean you have the best team. And listen, you watch them against Philadelphia on Tuesday night. Like when Towns is playing like that and he's defending like that, they're extremely difficult. The challenge comes when you get to the fourth quarter, right? Like how much gas do these guys have left in the tank?
Yeah. And just hopping back to Cleveland for a sec, they're doing this with a mid-level payroll. They're like pretty much right in the middle of the NBA.
Yep.
Is that sustainable, or are they going to just have to start paying these guys or break it up, or, like every team?
It's going to get a little bit more expensive just because the Mitchell and Evan Mobley extensions are going to hit next year. Those guys signed extensions this offseason. Mobley's contract will go from like 10 million to 35 million. So it's sustainable if you want it to be sustainable. It's sustainable to keep three players on max contracts. That's what they'll have with Garland, Mobley, and Mitchell here. And it's sustainable as a matter if you want to bring back Ty Jerome, if you want to bring back Karis LeVert, George Niang, Dean Wade, like guys like that who potentially could become free agents. It's not sustainable if all of a sudden you close the checkbook and says, you know what, we're going to build this roster with veteran minimum guys. And it's similar to kind of what you see in Milwaukee. Like Milwaukee has Gary Trent and Taurean Prince and DeLon Wright, and next year they'll have three new guys here. So it's sustainable in that way, that if you are willing to pay and if you're willing to retain some of your depth, I think you can do that.
With the NBA, I don't think as much about like the effects of ownership, just because it's a salary cap league and most teams can at least get to the cap. How much of an impact would you say it is between teams like the Celtics, who are in the Suns, I guess, who are willing to just, really pay top dollar and just see how it works, Mavs too, and versus teams like who just want to stay in that mid range? Is that going to keep them kind of like, sometimes everything clicks and you get a team like this Cavs team, but other times you're just going to have to like wait for those years and hope it works out?
Yeah, I mean, listen, when you win, it justifies a lot of things, right? If you go deep in the playoffs, that $400 million payroll in Boston, you can justify that when you're from when you're winning a championship. I mean, we saw this past summer, certainly with some of the rules and the apron and the restrictions that scared teams, right? I think it's less about how much teams are willing to pay and more about, hey, can we sign a guy as a free agent next year? Is our 2032 first round pick going to get frozen? Can we go out and make a trade? Because Steve Ballmer has proved that he can spend with the best of them. Joe Lacob can spend with the best of them. I mean, even with we've watched, certainly Klay Thompson goes back to Golden State in a Mavericks uniform, and I've said that's the best thing that could have happened to Golden State, because they were able to take his $40 million contract and chop it up into Buddy Hield and Kyle Anderson and DeAnthony Melton, because you have the flexibility, and it's it's not about spending $200 million towards the luxury tax. It's about the apron, right? It's about the flexibility that you can have moving forward to kind of build your roster.
Yeah, and I wasn't going to ask you about the Warriors, but since you brought them up, are they this good, or is this just like a
They
good dozen
are.
games?
They are proving that depth does matter here. I think it is sustainable. You saw the 3 games when Curry was out; they went 3-0. I mean, if Buddy Hield continuously shoots like that, it's certainly sustainable here. It's pretty interesting as far as what happens now when if we get to the playoffs. Who's the odd man out? How does Steve? I mean, I don't think you can play that in a playoff game. 13 guys. So I think there's a difference between regular season depth and playoff depth. This is the perfect roster for an 82-game regular season. Like, they are going to win their fair share when guys are either injured or when some guys have off nights. But I think when we get to the postseason, that's going to be kind of the true test there.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy enough to forget because Curry's such a unique figure. But I remember in those like the dynasty years, it felt like a team. It was like, doesn't matter, like it's not just like Curry or Clay, it's just like whoever's open, like it's gonna go take the shot or take the drive. And now it just feels, then it went into a phase of like, it's just like how many threes does Curry hit, and if it's like more than 10, maybe they win the game. Yeah. Hopping over to a different topic, just saw the news that Diamond Sports Group, which owns the FanDuel networks, which were the Bally's networks, they are basically going to start offering every game as a pay-per-view game for $7 on their streaming network if you don't pay for the full streaming service. I'm curious about your thoughts on that, and also just kind of made me wonder where we're at with NBA local media. Obviously, there's been so much focus on the national media with the huge deal. Local media, is it kind of like in flux the way the NHL and MLB are right now too?
I would think so. I mean, certainly with Diamond kind of with their hooks in with certainly some baseball, markets, whether it be, I think there's a lot going on with Atlanta right now as far as, certainly in the courts here. I think it's going to be interesting as far as do we go more national where ESPN is covering a Memphis. I know that's Memphis Lakers on Wednesday night, but maybe they have a Memphis Sacramento game on a Tuesday night, and it's not their prime game, and it's on ESPN Plus, and you're paying for that, and that's your, you're filtering through that, or if you're on NBC or Amazon, and there's a kind of a one-off as far as how they do that. It's funny how we, like the Yes Network is, fascinating too, because that's, I was in New Jersey, I was in Brooklyn, I saw that from a startup here. And how you basically that's sustainable because you're partners with the Yankees and you kind of go through that. And now they've partnered with the Knicks and they have their own app out there and all this stuff. But it is interesting here because when you look at, certainly how the NFL does it. And I know that's, you could say, well, it's just Sunday, right? You can do a Fox and a CBS and an Amazon on Thursday when you have 3 days here. It's hard for me to say how Diamond plays into a role when we've got or how do you go away from that when we're putting games on every night? Like that becomes a little bit more of the challenge there.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, I'm just curious if that product is something that ends up being something that works as a revenue stream, and it's just.
Well, it's interesting just because I'm here in Southwest Florida and I have YouTube TV. Like I don't get Heat games unless I buy the. I guess that's maybe that's FanDuel. I don't know, whatever Bally's. Unless I buy their app and stream it on here. So I watch Heat games like the next night. So I didn't get to see Eric Spoelstra call a timeout with no time when he didn't have one and get a technical and everything here. So that's going to be an interesting thing as far as how this certainly with the new media rights deal and how the ones who is left behind as a result of that.
Yeah, and we haven't talked about the in-season tournament yet, but now the Emirates NBA Cup, which is just underway now. What do you think is going to be different this year?
It's funny. Going into Tuesday, I was like, I don't know. Someone asked me a question. Are you into the Emirates Cup? I'm like, I don't really care. I see the floors and stuff, and then I start watching it, and I'm like, it feels like it's just it continues to be a heightened priority on the game. Where like last night, it didn't feel like it was just a casual Detroit-Miami Tuesday night game in early November. It didn't feel like Atlanta and Boston, like the game meant something, because Boston has come out and says, we want to be in Vegas, right? We want to go to Vegas. We want to, I know that, there's a cash prize. And then you're looking at it and you're like, oh, wait a minute, can we get Atlanta and Detroit and Vegas now? So I just feel like, I think it's sustainable as long as the players make it sustainable. And as long as they care about it. And from all indications last night, certainly watching New York, Philadelphia, and then, the Golden State Dallas game didn't need to be a cup game to matter. Certainly when you got Clay returning there. But we saw it last year. I think we've seen it at least in one night, that there's a heightened sense that these 4 games matter to try to get to Vegas here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Vegas game and the cash prize, honestly, I think is what really makes it click, because if the players don't really care, it becomes another all-star game where it's like, what are we doing here? But if the players are excited and like they want that extra game, then all right, it's on.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, I think it's like, like we saw Philadelphia, we saw the return of Joel Embiid, right, in the first game of the Emirates Cup and everything.
Yeah. All right. We'll leave it there. Bobby Marks, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Time now for Front Office Sports Tomorrow, where we look ahead to what's coming in the business of sports. Media contracts are the driving force in sports league revenue, and nowhere is that more true than for the Unrivaled League, which announced plans to play in a Miami arena with a capacity of 850. What the facility lacks in seating, it makes up for in amenities. The 130,000 square foot space will include training facilities, childcare spaces, and an area specifically designed for making content. Unrivaled is fully banking on its deal with TNT, which contains escalators if the league delivers a big audience. The league begins on January 17th and is still looking to lure Caitlin Clark. That's it for today. Leave us a rating and review wherever you like to listen. If you're on YouTube, we'd appreciate a like and subscribe. Tell your friends about the show. Thanks for listening. We will see you tomorrow.